In this presentation we examine whether Canada's official opposition, while still occupying its formal place within the Westminster system, has increasingly shifted its day-to-day political practice away from the constitutional responsibilities that anchor its legitimacy. The role of scrutinizing government actions, presenting credible policy alternatives, and strengthening democratic accountability has been weakened by a growing reliance on grievance-based narratives, rage-triggering messaging, and short-form communication crafted primarily for viral amplification. The claim under review asks whether this behavioral shift represents an abandonment of constitutional obligation or a transformation in operational priorities driven by the pressures of modern political communication. The claim is partly true. The official opposition has not legally surrendered its constitutional responsibilities, and its formal powers under parliamentary convention remain unchanged. Yet substantial evidence shows a practical reorientation away from meaningful legislative scrutiny and toward political performance optimized for partisan engagement and algorithmic reach. The opposition still participates in debates, committees, and votes, but its operational emphasis has drifted from constructive accountability toward message warfare, grievance amplification, and rhetoric engineered for social media virality. What emerges is not a constitutional abdication, but a functional dilution that leaves Parliament with diminished oversight capacity and Canadians with less substantive democratic debate. The constitutional role of the official opposition is rooted in the expectation that it will serve as a government in waiting, able to assume executive responsibility with seriousness and competence. This role carries obligations to scrutinize government actions, examine legislation in depth, test evidence rigorously at committee, and offer coherent policy alternatives grounded in fact. These duties are supported by long-standing conventions that rely on an opposition committed to democratic norms, transparency, and the strengthening of institutional accountability. In a well-functioning parliamentary system, the opposition elevates the quality of governance by engaging in informed, responsible debate and holding power to evidence rather than to emotion. Evidence from parliamentary studies and long-term analyses of House of Commons behavior shows a strategic departure from these constitutional expectations. Increasingly, interventions in Parliament are crafted for clipped social media distribution rather than for legislative depth. Committee work shows reduced amendment engagement, and efforts at cross-party problem-solving appear less frequent. Procedural maneuvers are increasingly deployed to obstruct rather than improve legislation, and former speakers, parliamentary officers, and political scholars point to a measurable decline in deliberative seriousness. This behavioral evolution does not erase constitutional responsibility, but it does weaken its practical fulfillment. Research into Canadian political communication reveals a marked intensification of anger-cued messaging and simplified, emotionally charged narratives designed for high engagement online environments. Rage farming, personal attacks, and algorithm-friendly outrage increasingly shape communicative strategy, creating incentives that reward conflict, certainty, and escalation over evidence, nuance, and accuracy. This shift is amplified by the rise of political influencers who operate outside traditional parliamentary structures, reinforcing polarized ecosystems that influence both messaging and fundraising strategies. The result is a communication style centered on emotional provocation rather than democratic accountability. This trend does not mean that the official opposition has abandoned Parliament or become constitutionally illegitimate. Its legal responsibilities remain intact and it continues to participate in parliamentary processes. The issue is not absence but substance. Constitutional functions are increasingly performed minimally, while political energy is redirected toward narrative combat and algorithmic amplification. As a result, the institutional role appears outwardly occupied but inwardly weakened. This does not constitute a formal breach of constitutional duty, but it does create a hollowing out of its practical value, with implications for the strength and effectiveness of Canada's democracy. A healthy Westminster democracy depends on an opposition capable of exposing weaknesses in government programs, presenting thoughtful alternatives, and defending the norms that underpin public trust. When political strategy elevates outrage over oversight, Canadians are left with weaker legislation, reduced transparency, and more polarized public debate. This shift contributes to declining institutional confidence and gradually erodes the civic foundation upon which parliamentary democracy rests. Even without a formal constitutional breach, the cumulative effect of performance-driven politics is a slow degradation of democratic stability, reducing the capacity of Parliament to serve the public interest. The official opposition remains constitutionally empowered, but its operational priorities have moved away from evidence-driven accountability toward grievance-based political performance. The role has not been relinquished in law, yet its substantive practice has been diluted, leaving a parliament less capable of meeting the demands of modern governance. The claim is therefore partly true: constitutional authority persists, but the quality of its exercise has declined, weakening Canada's broader democratic architecture. Canada's democratic system relies on a responsible, policy-literate, and institutionally engaged official opposition. Although the opposition continues to occupy its formal position, its increasing emphasis on grievance politics and rage-optimized communication has undermined the depth of parliamentary scrutiny and diminished the quality of national deliberation. This is not a legal abdication, but a functional degradation that already manifests in less effective legislation, heightened polarization, and eroding public confidence. Restoring the substance of the role is essential if Parliament is to fulfill its constitutional promise. The Library of Parliament report on the role of the opposition contributed essential historical and constitutional grounding, clarifying the institutional expectations that frame the analysis. The House of Commons Compendium of Procedure provided authoritative reference on parliamentary powers and conventions relevant to opposition responsibilities. The Canadian Press article on misinformation illuminated how distorted narratives undermine national debates, helping contextualize the role of grievance-based communication. The Public Policy Forum's study on polarization added empirical insight into how political behavior is shifting across Canada's democratic landscape. The Media Ecosystem Observatory's examination of political influencers provided evidence on the rise of algorithm-driven messaging and its impact on political practice. Viewers can pause here to view the full citations and follow links to the source material. For more fact-based content about Canadian politics, democratic health, economic trends, and rhetorical analysis, the Facts for Canadians platforms offer ongoing resources and educational material. These outlets aim to strengthen public understanding, improve media literacy, and support evidence-based democratic engagement.